Welcome. My name is Sebastian. I've been told that I have the honor to be the first designer ever talking at CIS. Hopefully not the last one. And today, together with Alfonso, Steven, and Naveen, we're going to be talking about best practices for identity experiences online. And if I can have my slides, that would be great. Anyways, first, I'm going to ask a volunteer from the audience. You, sir, right there. Thank you for volunteering for this. So what's your name? Rodolphe. Nice to meet you, Rodolphe. My name is Sebastian. And that was an identity experience, right? As simple as that. Now I know Rodolphe. I can refer to him, and we can talk, have a conversation, meet later, and establish a relationship. Not very deep, but relationship. We'll see. And I can even use Rodolphe's names to make this presentation better for him. So I can use it. And can I, please? Excellent, thank you. So let's say now Rodolphe wants to use my app, which is a food app. And I want to establish the same kind of relationship that we have right now. So the first thing, and this is a very simple implementation of identity. The first thing that you have to figure out if you already have an account or not in my app, and if you have to sign in or sign up. Let's say that you kind of remember that you're not sure, so you're going to sign up. So you're going to see this screen, and you're going to enter your email and your password twice. The ducks are the amounts of passwords that you have to type. And, oh, the accounts already exist. You probably tried it out a long time ago. Thank you for that. And you're now trying. You never really remember if you tried with this email or different email, but you already have an account. And you say, OK, you already have an account, so I'm going to log in. And you try to sign in. You type your email, type a password, which is the one that you always use because obviously you don't remember. So please don't do that. You should know, being here, that you don't have to do that. But you try to sign in, and no, that was not the password. So, OK, well, since you are my best customer ever, you're going to try to recover that password. So you go through the recovery flow, and we send you an email. You have to go to your email, and go inside the email, click there. You switch back to a browser. You enter your new password, because you have to reset the password, and you have to enter it twice, because I don't have any other implement. So we go here. We are already in 5 passwords. You click next. Excellent. You just recover your password. So now you're going to try signing. You enter your email, your password again, and you're finally in, and you're using my app. No, you're not using my app. You're using my website, because the recovery flow happens in a website, and now we have to switch back to my app, because that's what you wanted to use for Rodolphe. And you switch my app, enter the password again, and now you're in, and you can use it. So this is, there's no mistakes here. This is a correct implementation of this flow. We could use more things, but this is the normal thing that almost every app does. So to recover your password, I don't know if I remember or not, you have to go through and type 7 times a password, all right? For a very common and simple thing that happens all the time. It means that it's very difficult for users to do these kind of things, right? Almost 92% of users say that if they have to reset the password, they just won't use the app. They're not as loyal as you, Rodolphe, thank you. They're just not use it because they're not interested in going through all this process. And they have to remember passwords, and they have to remember that they use the passwords, and they have to remember if they have an account. So we're asking a lot from users. And it's not a very good experience. And there's nothing wrong. This is how it works, right? Another thing is, I've been designing for almost 17 years now, and no one ever, told me in a meeting, our app is going to be awesome. It's going to do this and this, and it's going to start having this magical identity experience. To be honest, it's our business, yes, but nobody else's business. So everybody who set up to build an app, it talks about what they can do and the marvelous services that they can offer and the technology that they can offer. But the last thing they think about is a sign-in system, right? They're like, oh yeah, we can do this and that, and we're gonna do this. And I always say, so you're gonna need to sign in users. And they're like, yeah, we're gonna do that eventually. But now the important thing is our business and the thing that we're gonna do, blah, 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 and they keep talking about it. So effectively, the first screen that the user is gonna see is the last one that you think about, right? It's not your core business, so you don't care much about it. You need it, but it's not your core business. And it's also very difficult to do, right? It seems simple, but it's also very difficult. You have to cover all these use cases, people who forget accounts, people who have passwords, people who have 2 accounts. You have to keep everything secure, which is also a pain, and you have to store passwords and toxic waste, that kind of stuff. And then you have to do it all over for all the platforms out there. And there are small differences, and it's not the same thing that works every place because users, different users, different platforms. And we asked around to some developers, and 72% of them say that they're not really happy with the experience that they're offering to their clients. So what is Google doing about it? And I'm going to pass this to Naveen, and he's going to talk about the products that we are developing at Google to help make these experiences better.
Thank you, Sebastian. I'm Naveen. I'm one of the identity leads for federated sign-on for single sign-on at Google. And so, yes, the problem is clear. I think most of us have gone through that flow many, many times. Even I go through that flow many times, and I think my colleagues go through that flow many times. So I think our solution has been pretty simple. I think most of the people in this community have been talking about this. Hey, let's make the single sign-on. Let's do single sign-on. We already have a Google account, or you already have one account, which we are trying to secure it. And you have heard multiple ways how we make the account much simpler or secure. But it's not that straightforward. In fact, actually, when we started talking about single sign-on, there were not really good protocols. So we have been actually working on creating protocols from OpenID, OAuth 1, OAuth 2, OpenID Connect. Finally, I think we are closer to there. Of course, there was SAML before I had actually started working in the space. So we actually have made things we have been working with the community to make sure that there are protocols which are interoperable. It's not really a single sign-on solution from one company would work across the whole internet. Make it fairly straightforward, make the user flows nice. But the third one is harder. I think most of the time what used to happen was, oh, this would work on the web, but in this browser and not in this one. You go to the mobile side, oh, it would work on this device. Do you have another operating system, BlackBerry? Sorry, you're out of luck. So that made it much harder. And then we have been making products to make it easier. So I think that's what has taken much longer. But overall, I think we divide the things into three buckets. One is if you already have a Google account, and as a developer, your use case supports, you can actually accept the Google sign-in, then it's actually fairly straightforward. And we have been working to make the whole process much easier. But then there are buckets where users already have ID and password. They may not have a Google account. They actually forget how did they sign in. Like Facebook or others, they had signed in different ways. But it's actually very tricky. This was one of the biggest issues we had seen when the OpenID was launched in the beginning. People had forgotten which OpenID they had used. Everybody had 4 of them. And they would go click on it, and they'll get into a brand new account on the website. And they think that my data was lost. So the smart lock for password remembers how a user had signed in. They could have signed in with a password or through Google or Facebook. But even with those 2 options, developers find it pretty hard to actually make the whole platform seamless, because you have to build account recovery, you have to think of account management, you have to think of merging identities. All of those things make it very complicated. In fact, it has taken us multiple years to build a good solution which actually works across different cases. And we used to call it Google Identity Toolkit, which is identity as a service for consumers, not necessarily for the enterprise use cases, but for general use case for developers. So let's dive in a little bit briefly, and I'll talk about the Google sign-in. Stephen will come back and talk about the smart lock for password, and we have Alfonso who will talk about Firebase Auth, which we just launched at Google I/O. So Google sign-in. You have seen some versions of it. It has been there for a while. The Google sign-in page, a couple of years back or so, if you see click sign in, it was based on OAuth 2. And you would basically see the basic sign-in, what people were trying to implement. They would see the screen like this as a user. You would see, oh, share my basic profile information, my friends, and so on. And it does actually make it scary, and many people may not necessarily agree to it. It feels more complex. So we have actually simplified it. And we have been using the account chip model, which is you basically try to say, hey, this is the account I'm trying to sign in. And this is only the data you would give it to the developer, which is essentially, and it's not a scary approval page. We are trying to make the sign-in part easier. And if you want to go get the API data, which is the OAuth part, which would come in separately. So if you want to basically get sign-in plus access to Drive, then you'll see an approval page. But just to do basic sign-in, the user just needs to click the account. And that's all they get. So a use case, let's say, for example, Doodle has implemented on Android. You click connect with Google. All they see is a one or more account which are on the device. You click on it, and you're in. And essentially, we have gotten rid of the approval screen. The user is essentially saying, hey, I want to log in with this account. That's all. And this actually has a much, much higher approval rate. And you don't need the extra data, but the users can sign in fairly easily. And if you think about it, in the past use cases where somebody is signing with email address and password, all you are doing is, most of the cases when you recover an account, you are going to go through send the email address. All you are trying to get an assertion from Google which says, hey, the user actually owns the email address. And that's all we are providing. So how does this work? So this flow is coming pretty soon on iOS and Android as well. Should be rolling out in the next few weeks. Again, this is based on OpenID Connect. Fairly straightforward. All we are giving you is, through the flow, an ID token. And I know we have talked about it, but I can just quickly mention, all you have is a subject, which is the identifier, the name, an email address, and a picture URL. Plus, there is other field. Let me come back to it and mention. So if you remember the standard OAuth flow, this is how people were doing it. They click sign in. They get back through authorization a code. App sends the code back to the backend. In fact, the backend is going to go and exchange the code back to get an access token. There is generally a second here, another call. Most likely, they would make a call to the user info endpoint and get the email address, and then verify this is the user, and then pass the cookies back to the user. With the new ID token flow, you can get rid of these two calls here on this side. And you do the sign in, you get an ID token, which you can verify on your own server, and then come back. There is something else which is worth mentioning, which is not in the slide, is in the ID token, we actually say, what is the app this ID token is for? So you can actually verify that the call which is coming back to your server is actually from your own app. Many of the enterprise and other places, they want to know what the app is, which is actually a very hard problem, but we get some of the data from the Android platform, and then we can actually put it back into the ID token, which essentially says, this is the app it is for, which I don't think there are many other ways unless you actually make it do a much more complicated solution. So the code is actually very straightforward on Android. In fact, the basic profile we have defined is just give you an ID token, which is essentially Google sign-in options. The default sign-in would just give you back an ID token. And once you have an ID token, you can actually send it back to the server. On the server, we have libraries, but you can use any open source library to verify the ID token, and which is fairly straightforward. Some of these libraries are branded Firebase Auth, but again, you can actually decide. You don't have to use the Firebase other options to use this. And once you decode the token, which is verified by it's signed by Google's private key, you actually can sign the user in. Same thing in JavaScript. It's actually fairly straightforward. When you say sign the user in, you get a response. You are just getting an ID token, which you can send it back to the server. You can decode it on your client side. again, on the Node.js server side, you can actually validate it. So it makes the process much, much easier just to do basic sign-in using a Google account. Now, but yes?
Question about the previous one.
Yep.
Is this ID token different from the OpenID token?
No, this is the OpenID Connect ID token from Google Sign.
That scenario where you explained that the middleware app might need user information and it might be making user calls. If you're bypassing that without anybody's information, is Google passing the ID, user information there?
The ID, if you saw in the ID token, the subject is actually the identifier what Google inserts, which is the internal ID, or what we call the identifier for the user. Is that, do I answer?
Sorry, what I meant to ask was, if the app was making a user info call to Google to fetch the user info,
Right,
now that part is getting bypassed because of the ID.
correct.
Where is the app getting that information from now?
In the ID token, yes. You do have that identifier in the ID token. If you needed much more information which used to come back from the user info, you can still get an access token and make a call. But generally, most likely you wouldn't need it. Yes. Does this go back? I'm not sure. Actually, this one goes back. Here we go. Okay, there we go. So that.
So that the name, email, picture, URL, that's what traditionally
Right.
we get from the user info.
Right. Yes. So there are a few other fields, as I mentioned, which would be there in the ID token, which you can use it. But generally, yeah, that's what makes it fairly straightforward.
So email address will still be populated without having to do an extra information.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Because the user is actually agreeing to type in the email address. So essentially, if you look at the flow before, the flow used to be that you'll see a list of email addresses. The user will click one of them, and then you'll see an approval page. And many times when we had done the studies, the people found that it was a bug, that Google is asking for the same permission twice. So essentially, we have eliminated the second screen. And just clicking the email address or the picture, they are indicating that they want to share this email address with the third party. And in some way, what we are doing is, instead of giving you just a plain text email address, we are signing it. We are saying, hey, here is the email address, and we have actually verified that user owns the email address, so you can actually use it right away. You could actually use this if the user clicks on login with Google, and you happen to have an ID and password-based account for the same email address. You could actually sign the user in at that point, because you know this user owns the email address. You don't need to go ask for a password from the user. If that is not clear, I can come back and talk about that later. So coming back, Steven is going to come back and talk about the smart lock for password. All right, there you go.
Sorry, for the privacy viewpoint, how did is a user authorizing this to share this information, his or her?
Right. So the authorization part is when the user is, so when you say, I want to do sign in, the screen which is popped up is actually managed by Google Play Services. It's a Google screen. So you don't actually share any data until you click on one of the email addresses you are selecting. So that's how, yeah, we are not sharing any data until you click on one of those options.
And so just as an anecdote, some of the numbers that we've seen from partners who have actually used this new style, the new UI, rebranded as the gold button, are pretty impressive. In fact, we've seen if you order clicking on a button, it doesn't have that social connotation. I think the past history of social sign-in in consumer apps
Is it good?
really set people's expectations Okay, can you hear me now? All right. So as I was talking about, basically, federation is not the silver bullet. It won't solve all of your users' problems. In fact, it'll create new problems. And so that's what I think really is something that app developers need to think carefully about. There's a couple of principles that I talked about yesterday in one of our talks that can help alleviate some of these problems. But there's a variety of APIs that Google provides on Android and in Chrome that make this work better. And as I was about to say, it really does get worse for mobile apps. It's not just websites where people have big keyboards that people are trying to log in. They're often doing this on their phones, where it becomes even more painful. And all of these things add up that at the end of the day, if someone sees that NASCAR, the array of buttons, all of the different choices, and they have to think through and really figure out how it is that they get into this app or remember or recover their password or go through the pain that Seba showed at the beginning of trying to sign up when the account already exists. There's just this cliff, right? That when we look at how many people see sign-up screens in our apps and we go out and talk to apps, they see that nearly half of people who see a sign-up screen don't actually get into the account that they intend to. They either give up, they end up with a duplicate account, or they have to jump through all of these hoops. And I look at all of these apps and see all the features that they're thinking about adding, and I wonder, is there really features out there that could double the number of people who are coming through the front door? And that there's such low-hanging fruit in the authentication space that I really wish that they just took a look at some of the performance that they see in their apps and try tweaking things with a couple of really simple APIs, some of which we'll talk about here. So the set of APIs that Google offers to help in this area, we've branded as Smart Lock. It's basically a set of assistive APIs to remember how people logged in, to be able to sign them in automatically again when they come back, and then to help them sign up by using previously used information, encouraging patterns that we've talked about elsewhere, such as going identifier first, steering the user into the account creation or sign-up flows. So Smart Lock came out last year, and we talked a little bit in one of the talks about it. So I'll kind of just briefly recap what the main pieces of functionality are and some of the new things that we've added since last year. The real, I think, magical moment that this unlocks is the ability to automatically sign people in. So basically, by saving the login information for a user, whether it was their username and password or whether they logged in with Google or Facebook, and then having that user come back, open up the app, and see this blue bar that just has shown them the information that they were looking for in this app. So imagine you're at a conference and you're in the line waiting for your ticket, you pull the mobile app out, and it's a brand new install. And instead of having to fumble there with your username and password, it just shows you this blue bar, it signs you in, and your ticket's right there. And everybody in line probably appreciates this as much as you did being there in the moment. So that's pretty cool for a native app, and that was what we launched last year. And so one of the interesting things that's come since then is starting in the app, putting in maybe itinerary information into a travel app like HRS, setting all of that up, and then really going to another device or even to your desktop and trying to complete that transaction. And what we've added in Chrome now is the same set of APIs, the ability to automatically sign in on the web, whether that's mobile web, the Chrome running on Android, or whether it's the desktop experience where you might be more comfortable putting in your payment info. You go across those devices and you're automatically signed in. And there's no user interactions involved. This is zero-click. If you're signed in with the same Google account in both places, all of this information will be available right away. And I think the thing that makes this really interesting to apps, and one of the reasons that we've seen such good adoption of this API in the last year, is that it's very simple. That in order to sign somebody in automatically, you construct this credential request, you pass it into our API, and you specify a little bit about what the types of authentication information you're looking for are. It could be either a username and a password, or it could just be this pointer to say, hey, you need to go to talk to Google or to Facebook to get a token to log somebody in, the same ID tokens that Naveen was talking about. So you pass that into the API, you get the information back, and then you can set up a session for that user with the information that came back from the API. Or if there's nothing, you can just proceed to a normal sign-in. So with a couple of lines of code, you can get automatic sign-in, and you can try this in big apps like Netflix is probably the most prominent one, but LinkedIn and a bunch of others have this automatic sign-in functionality. Very cool. And you could do the same thing on the web. So I showed the HRS demo there, but also The Guardian has even open sourced this. LinkedIn has this, Kayak, Alibaba, and a bunch of other big sites. So seeing a lot of value in having people continue their sessions across devices to know who they are and to have this personalized experience. And just not the friction that would otherwise be shown to the user as the very first experience when they visit an app or a website. Okay, so the success here, there's actually a link that I'll show in a minute that has a whole bunch of case studies, but it's examples like The Guardian of seeing just a big boost in cross-device usage. This is enabling all of their analytics and cross-device monetization that keeps them in business and keeps their users engaged. And it's really exciting to see, a few lines of code make that possible. So to get into this state, it's worth just showing what the experience is for the user to save this type of information. And as you can imagine, password management has existed for a while, and if you use a browser like Chrome, it'll offer to save your password. So that's, I think, something our people are generally familiar and comfortable with right now. And we've actually added this now to the native apps by being able to call an API, offer to show this dialog to a user and save their information. We see that about 2/3, about 65% on average, of people will opt in to save this information with Google, getting into a state where then they can be automatically signed in. But one of the interesting things that we alluded to earlier is, with an API, you can offer to save not just the username and the password, but whether someone actually signed in with a different type of credential, whether it was with a phone number-based sign-in, whether it was with Google or with Facebook. And so let's see how that looks. So this is the New York Times app, and if you try this out yourself, these are all live apps, by the way, all of our examples here. You can just download them. You'll see that a standard OAuth consent screen. You'll see the save dialog now, but notice that the one thing that's a little bit different is it says save your account. And so what does saving an account mean? It means instead of saving a username and a password, you're saving the username and a string that says, with Google or with Facebook. And then the idea is that once you come back, you install on a brand new device, or you go to the website, you'll see that blue bar, the information is retrieved, and then with that pointer saying, hey, go talk to Facebook, the app can go off, get whatever tokens, ID tokens, or other forms of authentication they need, sign the user in, and allow them to continue their session right where they left off. And so that's pretty cool, and also very simple to implement. You construct the credential object, and as I referenced earlier, it's with either a username and a password, or it's with a username and account type. So that could be Google, Facebook, phone number, or something like that. You save it through the API, and that will then in turn give you back an intent, as we say on Android, basically something you can show to the user to get the confirmation, or it will update an existing credential or save things like a Google username or a Google sign-in automatically, since we don't need confirmation for that. Same thing in Chrome. So it's very cool to see this as a actually standards-based web API, the credential management API built into Chrome in version 51 and higher. And you can try it out. We've got some example sites. Just do a search for credential management. And I think the performance numbers here, again, very interesting that, as 2/3 of people opt in to save this information, eventually in the kind of steady state, you'll have 2/3 of people then who are signed in automatically. And even within a few months of implementing this, Netflix was seeing that this in turn has a big benefit to the user experience, that without people having to enter the username and password manually, just being automatically signed in, there's less people to call them when they forget the username and the password. And so they, in fact, see from Android inquiries a pretty significant drop within a couple of months, that as their app has grown, their support costs around things like account recovery has actually gone down. So not bad for a couple of API calls, I think, and excited to see this in more apps soon. But I think the really interesting thing that you can do with this API is probably the stuff that we talk about at conferences like this, kind of what's on the cutting edge with doing things like identifier-first flows. And so there's another API in this smart lock set of product that allows for what we call an account chooser, or as we call it in Android, this hint selector-based user interaction. So the idea here is by calling this API and asking for a hint when you have no saved information, you can get a dialog to show to the user, and it has previously used information, identity information in it. And so that could be things like the email addresses, the name and the picture that they've used previously for other apps saved, or even the information that's available on this device. And so now, if we go kind of down the route of things that we've talked about at places like CIS, you can use this information in clever ways. That by showing this dialogue first, and there's some good examples, like this is the Zillow app, the Zillow real estate app. You can show this information, have the user pick the entry from the Play Services system dialog, take that hint, as we call it, and then steer the user to sign in the right way. And that could be signing in with Google or signing in with Facebook, creating an account, or logging into an existing one. Even helping people who don't have passwords by saying, hey, you don't have a password set up yet, but we know you, and we can send you an email. We can help you recover. There's a lot of really interesting things that they could do, and Zillow is a great example of a lot of them. But the reality is that there's a lot of apps out there that maybe don't have the sophistication of doing all of this back-end work to support sophisticated identifier first flows. So if we roll the video here, there is an interesting interaction that we've seen a lot of apps do, which is to keep their existing UI, so not to do anything fancy identifier first, still to have a login and a register button, to click on registration, and then show that hint selector dialog and use that information, as you see on the left there, purely for autofill purposes. And so you notice, like in the Alibaba example, that with one API call, they can fill 3/4 of the sign-up screen. And we've seen apps that just have a huge bump in the completion rates of their sign-up UI by auto-filling information. And so while the other person still struggles to fill information in, we can move on and let them finish it up themselves. But basically, what I'd really like to highlight here is how simple this is, that with existing UI, let's go to the next slide. They can call this API, we call it a hint request, take the request object, show it to the user as a dialog, get called back with the information they can use to either do an identifier first flow if they have the backend support for that, or just fill in existing UI. And it's amazing then to see that just client-side changes with just dropping this on top of existing UI. There's big apps like LinkedIn that ran this as an experiment and actually saw sustained uplift up to 15% higher successful account creation. And we've even seen some apps like Komoot in Germany run A/B tests and see as much as 20% higher conversion on their sign-up flows. So not bad for a client-side change. But I think the really interesting one to take a closer look at among all case studies here is something like WeGo, which has a travel app that has taken basically sign up from an item in a left navigation menu that's kind of buried and put it something that's in one of their key user flows, that as soon as someone creates some information that's worth saving and having across apps and instances of their service on different devices, that they'll offer to create an account with one tap. Using ID tokens and using a lot of the principles we've talked about of going identifier first. And with that kind of ease of account creation, they just see far, far more people, as many or more than 10-fold increase in account creation. So check out some of the case studies, and the APIs definitely give us feedback and let us know if you have any questions or ideas on how some of these principles and patterns can be applied to apps to make them work better. And so that's really what you could do with an existing authentication system to make it a little bit easier to use. So for the last section, we're going to actually have Alfonso talk about not just improving an existing system, but maybe even building a new one or taking this as a service where you get all of this functionality out of the box with something like Firebase Auth.
Steven, what makes the one-tab account creation possible?
Yeah, so there's a couple of patterns actually I've seen in one-tap account creation. So on the one hand, there's this realization that if you go back here 2 slides, when you're called back from the hint selector piece of UI, you get an ID token in there representing the email address in the same way that you would have got it from a Google sign-in. And so in the same way that you can do a Google sign-in to an app and create an account with one tap without a password, you can do the same thing here. So that's the pattern that WeGo uses. And the other interesting one that I alluded to a little bit in the talk yesterday is I've actually seen some apps that simply defer password creation. So they, with one tap, get all of the basic information they need, and then they send somebody an email right away and say, hey, Evernote, for example, does this. Welcome to the service, and if you'd like to set a password, you can do it later. But in the meantime, I've let you into this app with one tap to see what it's all about, to try it out, and to get a little bit more involved before asking for more information, like setting up a password. So interesting ideas around one-tap account creation, and I think we're going to collect some more numbers, and we'll be back soon to tell you how it works.
We could take questions for the smart plug before and then continue with the Firebase. Any questions on that?
There's one thing I guess that I talked a little bit about yesterday, which is that if you do allow somebody to create an account with one tap, you have to think about that user experience when they're returning. That if you've done it with a Google button and they know to click the Google button, they know how to get in. If you've allowed them to create a password or create a passwordless account, you also have to think about then what happens if they come back on another device and maybe in a place where smart lock isn't there to help them. And I think the identifier first patterns are an interesting opportunity there. And we've also just seen apps that, as soon as someone puts in an email address and struggles with the password, they'll send a reset email right away and let the user know that help is on the way. So there's a few things you could do there, but it is interesting, and that's what makes it a little bit controversial at the moment. Yep, go ahead.
So everything here was, all the demos were based around email addresses. Would there be any way to autocomplete a phone number or from?
Yeah, good question. So actually in the upcoming SDK here, there's going to, you see how it says set email address identifier supported? That's a bit of a hint, and the reason I guess we call it a hint selector is that this is not an email picker. We are going to add additional types of identifiers, and the next upcoming Play Services SDK actually does have phone number support in there, so you can get the phone number from the device. And we'll try to draw from other sources in the future. But more generally, the nice thing about using an API here is that you have some flexibility. You create this credential object, and the identifier field there is just a string. In reality, when you call the save API or something like that, you can pass in whatever string you'd like there, whether it was a phone number, an email address, or a username of some other type. So very flexible to use an API. OK, so we should probably hand it off to Alfonso then.
Thank you, Steven. My name is Alfonso. Oh, sorry. And I'm the product manager of Firebase Authentication. Although very recently, until not very recently, I was a mobile application developer, as maybe some of you are today in the audience. And when someone spoke to me about identity or authentication, the first thing that came to my mind were the countless sleepless nights I spent trying to implement a correct authentication system in my application. The struggles that I had weren't really that some of my users were stuck on the door. The problems that I had were much more fundamental. It was very hard for me to understand if I was really implementing my authentication system in a secure way, or if I, for example, was keeping my user sessions open long enough, or I could do something to optimize them. Also, I spent a lot of time integrating with OAuth protocols, or different third-party SDKs that kept changing all the time. And in general, implementing an account system and authentication system for my application felt a little bit like filing the taxes. It was something that I knew I had to do. It was something that I really didn't understand. And I was pretty sure I was leaving some money on the table because of how I was doing it. When implementing my own account systems for my applications, I will be doing something like the steps that you see here, very simplified. From setting up an authentication backend up to using that information to authorize my users into my own backend resources. When setting up my backend, I had to ensure it was always up to date following the security best practices that kept changing all the time. And also, that obviously, it was always available. If not, there would be a single point of failure for my application. When handling user credentials, if I'm handling passwords, you have to do that in a secure way. Then you have to integrate with, if you use federated identities, you have to integrate with all the protocols that also keep changing and upgrading every year. And you also have to make sure that if your users forget their credentials, they forget their password, you have to implement password recovery flows and things like that. Then when managing user sessions, you want to keep your users signed into their application as long as possible. But if you know that your user's account can be compromised, for example, if the device gets stolen or something like that, then you want to ensure that their user session is killed. And this is really tricky to implement in a correct way. And finally, once you've implemented more or less an account system, you actually have to think how you're going to use that to authorize your users into your own backend resources. In general, all of these tasks are very involved. And once again, most new application developers, new startup developers, they just want to build a beautiful user experience for the users, a killer service, but they don't want to deal with all of these things. So Firebase Authentication aims to make these problems easy for developers. It helps you get your users signed into your application very easily, and without understanding any of the complexities that a correct authentication implementation involves. This year's I/O, we announced a new version of Firebase Authentication, which, as Eric mentioned yesterday, is really a graduation of our existing Google Identity Toolkit offering, which helps you get your users signed in without having to deal with the backend or with any of the complexities that go into it. So some of you may have seen this picture before. This is a picture of one of our colorful data centers at Google. Firebase Authentication runs on infrastructure like this. And Google takes care of making sure that the service is always readily available, that it's always up to date with the latest security standards. And at the end of the day, you just consume the service using one of our client or server-side SDKs. Currently, with Firebase Authentication, you can get users signed in using federated providers, such as Google or Facebook, or your own email and password accounts. We're also going to be increasing the list of supported providers very soon. And now let's see how this actually feels for a developer. This is a snippet of code of our JavaScript SDK for web, where we would be signing up or signing in users using email and password credentials. If you take a look at the first line of code, for example, this would be sending the credentials in a secure way to our backend, checks that the email is valid, that the password is strong enough, creates a user record if it doesn't exist in the database, finally mints a pair of tokens, cryptographically signs them, sends them back to the device, persists them, and now you have a user signed in into your application. But if you're using Firebase to develop your own application, the only line of code that you really need to learn is the first one there. You don't need to learn anything that's going on in the backend. You can leave that completely to us. And now let's say you want to support federated providers. You would go, for example, to Facebook, create an application, and then you would go to our console. In a couple of clicks, you are already set up. And how this looks in code is also very simple. Once you have a Facebook access token, with this second line of code here, this is our iOS SDK for Swift. You would be sending the token up to our backend. We would be making sure that the token is valid, hasn't been tampered with, hasn't expired. It's really addressed to your project, so no one is trying to phish you or spoof your user credentials. And at the end of the day, you would end up with a user signed in into your device. And the only thing as a developer that you'd really need to understand is are these two lines of code, and everything else is taken care of. So now you get your user signed in, and maybe the next step would be for you to actually validate that everything is working. You want to make sure that your accounts are really properly being created. In order to do this without any code, we created a very easy-to-use interface where you can see all your users as they are created. And you can also create and delete test accounts from here. There's a couple of things I wanted to call out here. So here you would see one row for each user that is created in your application. The user UID would be a unique identifier that identifies the user across your system. It doesn't matter if the user signed in with Google, with email and password, or whatever. The UID is always the same, and you don't need to disambiguate based on the credentials used. Also, another important thing is this second column, the providers column, where you can see that in Firebase, you can actually link more than one credential to the same account. So you can, for example, get a user signed in using email and password, and later on attach, for example, to their credentials to the same account. And this would be how you, once your users are signed in, you can react to the sign-in state of your application to update, for example, the user interface. Now, a very natural thing to do once you have your user signed in is you actually do something with that information to authorize your users into your own backend. This is also very simple with Firebase. We use OpenID Connect ID tokens also to represent the user session. So you can just get the token in one line of code from the client, send it up to your backend, verify it with also one line of code, and then finally perform your own authentication logic. And if you're actually using other Firebase services, Firebase is not only authentication. It contains a real-time database, file storage, and other things that you can also optionally use. If you're using, for example, the Firebase database, you don't actually need to write any code to authorize your users into your own backend resources, perform any access control logic on your own. Everything is done without any line of code from your side. So to quickly sum up, Firebase Authentication is a managed authentication backend with currently 6 sign-in methods. We're increasing this pretty soon. Client SDK is for Android, iOS, and web. Even a C++ SDK for mobile developers. Server SDK is for Node, Java, and 6 languages more are coming soon. And a easy-to-use console for setup and user management. A couple of partners that implemented Firebase Authentication that we wanted to call out. This one, Chuday, is a Korean application that was developed in not 2 days, but 2 weeks, actually. Authentication took them, they implemented Facebook and Google federated identity in an afternoon. And in just 2 months since they launched, they've actually already gotten like 1 million users. If they were implementing their own authentication system, they would probably be like 2 or 3 months behind launch. They were probably launching in August or something like that. So this is a really good example of the return on investment you can get if you use a tool like this. And Quaver also a very beautiful application, similar example. Check it out in the App Store if you want to see a good example. So in the past minutes, I've covered how Firebase Authentication helps you get your users signed in very easily. But there's one thing I haven't covered, which is the user experience, the user interface that you actually still have to build. But in these last minutes, I'm going to invite Seva back to stage to tell us one more thing that can help with that.
And you know what user experience means, that you have to deal with designers, which is double the work, because we ask for stuff all the time, and we need to touch up and do the best thing possible. But hopefully this time it's not going to be that way, because we are going to try to solve that problem of dealing with designers, that annoying part. I know I'm annoying. So you set up to design your screens and your flows, and the first thing you need to do is to sign in users, right? So you have your sign-in screen with username and password. And what is next? What you have to do next? You have to sign up, right? So you add the sign-up flow. Oh, mistake one. You add the sign-up flow with identifier first, and I have 3 screens and a bit more of code there. They have to make some decisions based on the email. Next thing, what is? Any checkers? If exactly, users forget the password all the time, so you have to add the forgot password flow, and you have to send emails, and you have to do all that kind of thing. Next thing they have to do. Aren't you the ones that build this kind of stuff? Privacy policy? Close, but not much. So passwords are not very good. We know that. So you need to add some IDPs and federated. So you add Google, and now you can sign in with Google, and you have to add Facebook also. But anyways, you add sign in with Facebook, and now we have a new problem, which is account linking. Exactly, because people never remember what they used to sign in. So if they have a previous email account and now they're trying to sign in with Google, you have to do the disambiguation. You have to have some screens there. Oh, we saw that you have, we see that you have a previous account, so sign in with this. And you think that you're done, but you say, oh, these cool Google APIs and the smart look thing and everything. So you just do that, and you end up something similar to this. And you're finally done, right? No. Because now you have to do that a couple more times, because we like our designs to work in Android and web and iOS. And there's always some differences. So you do that a couple more times, and it ends up looking something like this. And yeah, after you do it, you have to maintain of that, and the designers are going to come, and they're going to say, we need to tweak this, and we need to tweak that. They have to go and tweak it and go back and forward. And that, we did that, actually, and it takes this amount of lines, right? It's quite some work. We've been working this for a while. Developers have to deal with me every day saying, we need to change this. So we end up being like around 5,000, 3,000, 8,000 lines of code. But since we did that, we said, hey, why don't we just give it away? So instead of you having to deal with your designers, if you're building your app, you just use Firebase Auth UI. That only requires 5 lines of code or 7 lines of code to implement in your UI. It comes all pre-done. You can just deploy it. And this is how you do it. Let me explain. You type this somewhere, and it works. That's all I know how this works. I've been told that, yeah, that is how it works. And if you want to iOS, you type this, I guess you can copy and paste also. I don't know exactly. So yeah, and JavaScript also works like that. And you're going to get this, which is a customizable UI, and then you can theme. So if you want to make like small tweaks in the design, you can do it. You can change the colors and the backgrounds and stuff like that. And you're going to still receive all the updates that we do to the Firebase UI. But if you don't want to do that, you can still branch it. And we are offering this all open source. So you can still have your implementation, use this database, and then do whatever you want with it. So to recap, I'm going to call Naveen. I thought I had a recap there.
Yeah, so we are running late. Let me just quickly recap. And essentially, so the Firebase UI, just to clarify, yes, we have the API, but to actually build the whole flows is pretty complex, and it actually takes a lot more time. You have to go through translations and other things and so on. And so all of that is available as open source, and you can actually modify it. But I do want to caution it. We have certain set of customizations which we recommend using it, like change the background color and put images and so on. But if you customize, you make too many changes, then when we release a new version, you may have to do a lot more work. So be aware of that part. But you actually can essentially take the flow and build the whole app with all the beautiful flows within an hour or so. Basically, that's the whole idea, where you have the whole thing. And these are all based on Google to consumers or for developer offerings. But actually, if, let's say, your employees are on Google, you could use the Google sign-in to sign into your IT apps on Android and iOS. And you can actually get the security of the Google account plus the sign-in to make it much, much easier. And the smart lock for password would make sure you would remember how people had signed in. And with the whole Firebase Auth plus UI, you can actually, as a developer, the simple applications, you could actually outsource most of those pain points to Google. So questions? So there are some links, and if you have any questions, we can take those. Thank you. Yes. The Firebase Auth does not support multi-factor auth at this point. It is really, if you do want to do that, you essentially require one of the IDPs which supports. So you do have what we call custom authentication. You can actually roll your own authentication where you could rely on somebody who supports multi-factor authentication and use it internally.
Like Google, for instance. If
the Google one is, I think we are talking about some of the details, how to make it available, the Google multi-factor authentication bits to the Firebase Auth. There are some tricky situations where somebody could require all their users have multi-factor auth, and the users will sign up without actually knowing what they are getting into. So in the consumer world, we need to be careful. So we are still thinking about that part. But it's not available at this point as such, the multi-factor auth.
So it doesn't have two factors?
Well, it depends on how you... Right. So the Firebase Auth itself, like with the email address and password, does not support multi-factor auth natively, but you do get the benefits if the Google user has multi-factor auth or Facebook user has multi-factor auth. And what we are thinking is we could make it in such a way where you can say, hey, I require that you have logged into Google through multi-factor auth. That could be one way of doing it.
So if I set it up for my Google account,
right,
then I'll just, in that flow, it would just...
Yes, then you do get technically the multi-factor auth, because...
So it's all up to what I've done on the Google account.
We are actually, I think there is some of the work in the protocol side to actually give the assertion when we do security key assertion on the Google side to pass it back to the relying parties. So, which we are working with John Bradley to figure out that part.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.